Good evening, and welcome to the Henry Schein Dental Academy webinar series. My name is Corinne, and I will be your moderator. We are excited to welcome Dr. Rajan as our speaker today. He is a leading clinician, international speaker, and assistant director of digital dentistry at the Touro College of Dental Medicine. In addition, he has a full-time dental practice in New Jersey and has been practicing for 18 years. Today, he will be going over some digitally driven solutions in cosmetic dentistry. Before we get started, we do have a few reminders for you. At any point during the webinar, if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A section of your control panel, and we will answer them live at the end. And Henry Schein is not offering CE credit for viewing or attending this presentation live or on demand. Dr. Rajan, welcome and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Corinne.
Yes.
Very good to be here. And good evening to all of you. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. Tonight, we're going to talk about how to combine intraoral scanning with the TRIOS, along with 3D printing to treat aesthetic cases. Because today we have unparalleled tools at our disposal to be able to treat even complex cases predictably. And there's never been a better time than now to get involved with technology to elevate your level of care and confidence treating patients. And so by the end of this talk, my hope is that you'll see the big picture on what's involved with leveraging technology for improved dentistry. As far as my disclosures go, I have made these types of presentations on behalf of 3Shape, Straumann, as well as Henry Schein. And so the question is digital. This term can be confusing today, especially with respect to digital dentistry. It's a confusing term. And what does it really mean? Are you digital? Well, in 2022, my suspicion is that most of us are digital in some capacity in our offices, whether it is in practice management, charting, radiography, photography. We're going to talk about diagnostics, digital impressions, as well as digital manufacturing. And so when it comes to being digital in 2022, we can really think about it in two different categories. We can talk about our practice management systems as well as our clinical management systems. And so tonight, we're really only going to talk about clinical management systems and everything that has to do with using digital techniques can be categorized into one of these five boxes. So when we talk about our data capture versus using technology for diagnosis and design, then we talk about management, and finally, manufacturing as well. So when it comes to digital data capture, we've all probably been using digital sensors for quite some time. Every new patient gets the same data capture in our practice. Any adult patient is going to start with full series of radiographs, obviously. These are the perioral photography shots that we'll include for every new patient. And every new patient gets an intraoral scan with our TRIOS scanner. We also on site have a CBCT, even though we're a general office and we don't typically do a lot of surgery. We like to act as a planning center, and we actually have all the digital technology to be able to capture whatever data that we need in an efficient manner without sending the patients to other offices. And we're going to take all this data that we've captured, and we're going to use it to come up with diagnoses for our patients. Once we've finalized the diagnosis, it's going to be time to send this to actually design and then manufacture, whether it is a single crown, a surgical guide, splints these days, digital wax ups, everything up to screw retained prototype bridges. And when it comes to design today, you have to understand that you can either outsource your design. So those of us that are using laboratories, we are outsourcing our design and our manufacturing, but we can actually design many things as dentists in-house. And when it comes to outsourcing it, there are actually services that you can use for design. full contour is one of them. And so these are actually laboratories that don't actually produce the physical objects. They only do the design, and they can send the files back to you so you can manufacture them with 3D printing or milling, or you can choose to actually design on your own in-house. And today there's actually a lot of artificial intelligence that's starting to be built into some of these CAD design softwares to really streamline how quickly and how efficiently we can design our own restorations and guides and splints and much, much more. And so if you're thinking about getting into design in your dental practice, being a dentist, you have to understand that there are paid softwares and there are free softwares. And so to be able to manage design in your office, you need to have some kind of CAD design software. And these are some of the most common ones that are used today. And in fact, we actually use some free softwares as well to be able to manipulate files as we're going through the design process. And so this is basically the three categories of things that we um, need to manage between the acquisition, the design, and the manufacturing. When it comes to manufacturing, these are basically CAD design files for a digital wax up model, and all on for 3D printed prototype, and also a surgical guide. We can basically manufacture these ourselves, or we can outsource them. And when it comes to making it ourselves, we're talking about 3D printing or 3D milling. And you may be wondering, what do we use our printers for? Um, and the truth is, we're using them for much more now than we were a couple of years ago. And so today we're routinely printing all of our models, we're printing guides, printing splints, we're printing these all on X prototypes, and we're even printing dentures. Today we'll talk about some 3D printers that we're using. We're going to talk about the Sprint Ray printer as well as a few others. And um, the way that we can categorize 3D printing today is basically by the general price point. And so the two printers on the left would be considered kind of the value segment of 3D printing. I would say, anywhere less than $6,000 or $7,000 to get started. The ones in the middle are going to be kind of the mid-level printers, and those um, are typically going to be between 10 to 15,000, and the ones on the right can be even more and are used in laboratories for high production scenarios. And the reason that we are printing so much more today than we were when I first started, my first printer I got in 2017, is that we have the availability of so many FDA cleared resins that we can actually produce a lot of different things that are biocompatible. And so these are some of the things that we print, and some of the products that we use. Um, the other thing that we use with our technology is to use use the data to manage our patients. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. The TRIOS scanner has something called TRIOS patient monitoring. And we basically capture scans over time, and we have a digital library of all of our patients going back about 4 or 5 years now. And it's very interesting to follow patients this way because we have objective data that we can follow over time and observe changes, make very detailed measurements, and it really does lead to a lot of substantive conversations and interactions with our patients that are really at a different level than what we were able to do just a couple of years ago. So I asked the question again, are you digital? The better question is, how digital are you? And the answer is that we use our technology first and foremost to be able to increase our predictability. The very first thing that we use our scanner to do is to actually create a connection with the patient. And so even though we're using the intraoral scanner to produce the majority of our dentistry, the first thing that we use this technology for is to facilitate the relationship, the communication with new patients. And so I came up with this concept called the 4 T's. And what do the 4 T's stand for? The first T is technology. We use the technology to provide transparency. And so we will send our scan feed from the scanning laptop onto the large monitor that's in our operatory. And we really provide transparency for patients. And when we provide transparency for patients today, we found that it is much easier to earn trust with new patients and existing patients. And once we earn trust with patients, they're more likely to follow up with our treatment recommendations as well. And we use digital technology in all phases of our patient progress through our office, from the new patient experience to developing findings and options leading to a diagnosis and treatment plan. When treatment is recommended or desired, then we use our technology to move to a phase of two-dimensional and three-dimensional virtual planning. And that the output of that planning leads to us doing some kind of a live preview or mock-up for the patient before we've done anything irreversible. And we use the technology obviously to accomplish the treatment, and then to monitor patients. And so intraoral scanning today is much more than just a replacement for impression material. It's really used in every part of our practice every single day. And what's really great about moving into all these digital techniques today is that we don't have to be masters and be experts on day one in order to get started using the technology. And so I love to use the analogy of crawl, walk, run, fly. Um, if you're just getting into this and you're switching from analog techniques, you don't have to worry about doing some of the really complex things um, that more experienced dentists are doing. Basically, go through the crawling phase, adopt the intraoral scanner, use it for diagnostic scans, use it at your new patient visits, really integrate it into your daily workflows and your daily habits and routines with you as well as your team. And as you get going, start off with the walking phase, really doing 1 and 2 units, doing kind of simple cases to really get an idea of how the technology works and what are some of the limitations that you're going to experience inevitably as you get started with new technology. And once you really get going with that, then you really get into some of the interesting, kind of exciting things about digital dentistry that we're going to talk about today. Those are non-restorative workflows, smile design, and 3D printing. And it moves really to this expert phase, which can take a couple of years, where you can really manage all of your own design, your own printing, complex full arch cases. And when we look at this crawl, walk, run, fly, the beginning phases are using the scanner more as a replacement for impression material. And the more complex workflows really have a lot to do with data alignment. And so let's talk about smile design. That's the topic of tonight's presentation. And smile design is a very uh, popular term these days. You can't go very far on Facebook or Instagram without seeing things about digital smile design. There's many different vendors and systems and softwares to do this. And what is it really? It's really thinking about where we're going to put our teeth when we restore our patient. But in reality, it's actually a lot more than that. We use this process of smile design in our office for much more than just where the new teeth are going to go. We really use this technology and leverage it and involve the patients. And we use the smile design process for a patient that comes in for aesthetic dentistry to really build a relationship with them. We do use it for treatment planning. We create an experience around it, and we also find a way to use this to come to our diagnosis, as well as, most importantly, maybe an informed consent of what we're planning to do for the patient. And the patient can really give a lot of feedback and input, and you learn a lot about the patient that you are planning to treat going through this process. And so years ago, when I first got into practice, I went through the Pankey Institute in my late 20s. And then in my late 30s, I went through the whole curriculum at Spear Education. And um, they teach a process called facially generated treatment planning, and we used to do it on PowerPoint and Keynote. And so when we really think about what smile design is, it's basically this kind of a concept. It's basically overlaying a proposed outcome over an existing condition, and that's all that it is. So let's watch a quick video of what the process of using smile design and 3D printing goes like in my private office. And so there you really see just kind of the complete overview, and you saw all of the digital data capture. I don't have a very large office. It's about 1,500 square feet. And you can see out of really any type of office space or situation, it's possible to leverage these tools. And when it comes to smile design, one of the one of the key things that we all have to learn to do is to take photography. And it's very important. You saw in the video that we need to make a designated place in the office to be able to capture these photographs, because we need to be able to take decent portraits to be able to align the data and then to get into the smile design software. And so my photo studio setup has gone through a couple of versions. We're currently on our third version, and we basically just need a backdrop. We have that little black backdrop. We have a little stool that we got from Amazon, and we have a light source. We have those continuous flat panel LED soft boxes. They run on camera batteries, so there's no wiring. We had one of our local contractors come and just make these custom metal tubes that we can put these things into, and they're ready to go. So when we're ready to do something like this, we have a patient that's interested, we just say, we're going to take the DSD smile design photos. We bring this little stool out, we turn on the lights. And for these portraits, we're actually using a Panasonic Lumix. It's a mirrorless camera, and we're shooting on the auto setting. And so there's not a lot of training that you need to accomplish to be able to outsource this to one of your team members. And you can take pictures like I just did on the right side of the screen. That's my dental assistant, Robin. And we can get pretty nicely exposed photographs with the proper amount of clarity and resolution to be able to load these pictures into the Smile Design software. And when we get into the Smile Design software, this is kind of a funny picture, but these are the two most important photos that you need to take if you're going to do a digital smile design. And you can see here, using myself as an example, you need to get the patient to be looking straight at you. If they have glasses, you have to ask them to take it off. And you really want a big, goofy kind of grin smile with the teeth apart. And we typically will take the picture on the right first. So we need to have the retractors in, need to have the arches open, need to be looking straight ahead. We shoot a couple of pictures, then you ask the patient to take those retractors out and then give you that big goofy smile. And the trick to be able to get good alignment, we're going to align both of these photos together in the software, is that the head can't move significantly between these two photos. So then when we're doing our design, we can actually toggle back and forth between the smile photo and the retracted photo. So let's look at a case actually, and we're going to go start to finish, where we use the technology to engage a patient in smile design, and then it ends up being an 8-unit reconstruction in the anterior zone. So this is Kathy. She was my patient. She's been my patient for over a decade. And she had these porcelain veneers placed probably 15 years ago. And she was never really happy with the way that they looked. She felt like they were always a little crooked. She didn't love the color. And then she did notice that she was starting to get some recession around the margins and some decay at the edges, which her previous dentist had gone in and actually bonded with some flowable composite. It, um, it looked like. And so she was ready to replace these restorations. And um, we started by taking our data. So I took the perioral photographs that you see here. We did our portraits. And when you start to analyze her portraits, you can appreciate that there is this unevenness, this cant that's present in number 6 to 11. It's especially noticeable with her lip at rest, and she didn't like this part. So we take our two most important photos, just like I showed you before, and this is going to bring us into TRIOS Smile Design. So our Smile Design software is directly built into our digital ecosystem, which is called Dental Desktop. And so it's very convenient if we're using 3Shape products in our office, we're using the Trio scanner, is that we have this very easy platform that we not only use to capture scans, but then the scans are stored here, and then we can use the scans in different ways. And so when it comes to a smile design, we're not going to use the scan, we're only going to use those two photos. So I simply just click Smile Design on the left-hand part of the screen. And then where you see that little plus icon on the upper right, I'm just going to grab those two photos from the File Explorer. And then I'm going to invite the patient into my office. And so we do all of this live with the patient. And that's really one of the hows. So whenever you see an H on the upper right hand part of the screen, I'm going to show you some of my hows. And so once we have those two photos, and this doesn't cost any, it really doesn't cost us any money. There's no lab expense. It's really just clicks and some time. And it's pretty quick as long as we're ready to get our photographs quickly, like we are. And so now we can do the facially generated style kind of digital mock-up for the patient. And so we can actually show the patient Kathy how she would look with square teeth or oval teeth or triangular teeth. We can assess the width to length ratio as we're morphing these teeth, wider or longer. That little number is going to be changing. And we know that in general terms that if your width to length ratio is somewhere between 77 and 80%, you're going to have nice looking teeth. And not that we do that every single time, but it's really nice to have a software where you can basically move around and you can kind of incorporate some of these other things that are taught in cosmetic dentistry. The other thing that we can do is actually apply different libraries, not just the generic tooth shapes like square, rectangular, and triangular, but we can actually use the digital wax ups that have been made by famous lab technicians like Matt Roberts, like Lee Culp, like Mark Dixon, all of these really talented special laboratory technicians have digitized their style of wax ups, and they're actually included within the library of the 3Shape Smile Design software. And so we can actually show Kathy what she would look like with the Matt Roberts library. We can also use natural libraries that are donated from other people. And these are libraries that are captured from the people that have not had dentistry and that just have pretty smiles. And there's a Swedish lab technician, Shemek Swerniak, and he has a lab in Sweden. And him and his wife Kate actually produced this book called Fabulous Smiles a couple of years ago. And Shemek is one of the most sought after laboratory technicians in Europe. There's a long waiting list to work with him. He's kind of like the Matt Roberts or Lee Culp of Europe. And him and his wife basically digitized 18 different people of different ages, male and female, and they made this big coffee table book. And so today, what's interesting is that my digital smile design process actually starts with showing a patient the first page of this coffee table book that you don't even see the faces, you just see the perioral zoomed in, and you see these different smiles. And what's interesting is that beautiful smiles are not completely symmetrical, right? There's a beauty in nature to having a little bit of asymmetry, a little bit of characterizations. And it's interesting because if you have a patient that's looking for natural kind of aesthetics, we don't have to apply, one kind of wax up to their teeth. And if you're using a laboratory that's using physical wax ups and they're building wax by hand, if you have a really experienced dental technician, they may be able to do a couple of different styles of wax up. But if you have a beginner lab technician or kind of an average lab technician, they may only really kind of do one style. And if you've ever noticed why every case maybe starts to look the same when you use a certain laboratory, that's kind of why. And so using these different libraries is a way to really customize every case that you do in a really predictable and easy way without having to, work with maybe some of the best technicians in the country that we don't all have access to. And so this emerging trend is basically starting with this book and then using the corresponding library that the patient chooses in Smile Design. We get our digital data with our trios, and then we actually use all that data to make a digital wax up, and that leads to the try, and you'll see that. But I did this exercise on myself where, I went to the Fabulous Smiles library and I basically smile designed myself using all 18 libraries. And what's interesting is, at least in my experience, I remember learning in dental school that and I learned it in my denture course, if you have a guy with a big blocky face and you're probably going to give him a square looking tooth, or if you have a very, um, uh, an older female, a grandma with an oval face, very soft features, maybe you're going to do an oval tooth. And what I'd learned by doing this exercise on myself is that actually the aesthetics of smiles is much more unisex than I originally thought. And some of these smile libraries are female patients, happen to be female patients. Some of them are male patients, and so I don't even show the the patient whether it's male or female. And we can really start to see that you can characterize these smiles in almost an infinite amount of ways. And this is really just a starting point, because once you get into the actual design of the smile design, you can change anything that you want to. So this is just a starting point, actually. And it's a way to really kind of get into the patient's head. And you'll see that's what we actually did with Kathy. And so when we did this process with Kathy, lo and behold, the one that she connected with was actually the Matt Roberts Library. That's Matt. He owns the CMR Dental Lab in Idaho. And so what she said is that, yeah, I like those shapes of teeth, and that's what I think my teeth used to look like before I had these veneers. And that's step one. That's the connection with the patient, where you're getting into their mind and really figuring out what they want before you do something irreversible and they don't like it, right? So that's the whole point of this. And so the output of any digital smile design software is simply this photograph. And so this comes out of our TRIOS Smile Design. It's basically just a wireframe architectural drawing of the new smile that you're going to go to. And this is the facially generated plan. And this is what we'll basically send to our laboratory, or that we'll use ourselves for the design phase. But we really want to engage the patient. What I'd really like to do is show the patient, what this could look like, and start to assess, whether this is something that she wants. And so the neat thing about the Smile Design software is that we can actually add color and texture to that wireframe drawing. And now she can actually see what she may look like. And the way that we do this with the patient is we give them the mouse and then we try not to talk. And you'll see them. They just kind of go back and forth. And when they go through this process, they're really starting to imagine, this treatment in their mouth. And you start to really understand what they want. So every patient says they want a white smile. You want to know, I want to know at least whether they're talking about a natural white smile, like an A1 or maybe a B1, or are they talking about a really Hollywood kind of unnatural kind of zero M1? And I want to know that before I treat the patient. And so if I show this to them, I say, "Ooh, that's way too white," then I know that they are looking for a little bit more natural cosmetics and color. And this is really invaluable. This is actually one of the reasons I was afraid to do this kind of treatment earlier on, because I was really afraid of doing something and getting it wrong and having to redo it and have the patient upset. They paid a lot of money. And so these techniques are really how I got around some of those limitations that I had in my own practice and my own mind. So before we take the mouse away, I stop it in the middle and we do the 50-50 shot. And so it really becomes clear to the patient that this is where you are. This is where we're thinking about going. What do you think? What would you like to do? What would you like to change? What do you like? And so at this point, we're going to send the patient home. And typically the way that I do this is I will actually email the patient later that day and I'll share some of this information with them. I'm going to share you the actual screenshots of the email that I uh, sent to Kathy. And so here you can see that's the screenshot of the email. So you can see I sent the little video of the smile slider. I sent the 50-50 shot. I sent the wireframe architectural drawing, and then I sent the one with the color and the texture. And so here's what I said to her. I said, Kathy, I did some initial 2D planning in our software for the changes to your teeth we discussed. Take a look and let me know what you think and if you'd like any changes. If it looks good to you, I'll send to the lab for 3D processing so we can do a live simulation in your mouth of this design. And here's what she wrote back. She wrote, Dr. Rajan, thank you for putting this together so quickly. It's great to really see how my teeth might look. I am happy with the design and ready to move forward. I also like the lighter color and would love to keep it, but I think it depends on how much lighter we can get the bottom to be. I thought maybe we could test the lighter color with the temp and see how they look. And that's just when I got that response, it really clicked in my mind that this is kind of the culmination of this process of really engaging the patient. It this process has gone from something that I'm planning to do to Kathy to something that I'm doing for and with her. And it really gets the patient on the side. I love the fact that she now realizes that there's going to be a limitation to how white her top teeth can be, with the fact that her lower teeth are not going to be treated. And these are the kind of things that you don't want to have to address after you've done the treatment, because then it sounds like an excuse. And so I wrote back, I said, you're welcome. Sounds good. I'll send to the lab today and aim to have it back in 3D in time for next week's visit. It's at this point that we actually charge a diagnostic wax up fee. To do live mock-up, we actually charge $100 per tooth. And we found that when we present the treatment in this way and we ask the patient, would you like to see how this could look before actually investing the full fee, most every patient is going to say yes. And we've had very little problems with explaining why this has to be a separate charge from the final restorations. Patients kind of get it when they see this. And so now it goes to the laboratory. And so I'm going to send the same photography to my laboratory, which is why I have to take really nice portraits. They're going to align the intraoral scan from the TRIOS onto that portrait photo, the retracted portrait photo. Now it's up to the laboratory technician or the designer to basically interpret the two-dimensional picture on the left and create a 3D wax up. And the neat thing is, we chose the Matt Roberts library. The patient liked the Matt Roberts library. And guess what? If we're using a 3Shape lab and they're using 3Shape CAD design software, it's called Dental System. Well, all they have to do is choose the Matt Roberts library on their end. And so there's no game of telephone. And you'll see that this wax up that they're going to produce for me is the exact same shapes as the one that is in the Smile design software. And so this is really the point of the process, where the process goes from 2D to 3D. And so today, we simply have to have the laboratory be able to do this. We can outsource this to them. They simply send back a file back to my email, and they send the STL file back, and then I can load it into one of my 3D printers, either the SprintRay or the Formlabs, and we can print a diagnostic model. And this is not a complex workflow. We did this in the analog days all the time. I'm just going to make a putty matrix. And now we're going to invite the patient back. Now she comes back for the second visit. First visit was basically data capture and the live smile designing session. The second visit is going to be the intraoral mock-up. Most cases are additive in some way. And so when it's like that, we can basically inject some bisacril into the putty matrix, We can place it onto the teeth without bonding it. And now we can basically see, is what we designed on the computer screen actually going to work in a functional way for this patient? Because we can make things look however we want in the software, but it actually has to function in the patient. And this is kind of it's actually more for me than the patients in some way. It's more for us really, because we can really see if this is actually going to fly, or if something is way off. If something's way off, we're going to go change the design now before we get to the preps. And the way that we figure that out is we go back into our little adapted photo studio setup with the mock-up on. We take our photographs, we try to get the patient to smile. We even take videos sometimes these days. And before we take the mock-up off, we get a 50-50 of the mock-up. And this is kind of the last chance to really get the patient to be engaged and also aware of what's going on. And so this is where we talk a little bit about process mapping. And so this is the overall kind of treatment process map that we talked about in the beginning. This part of the process map is the prosthetic part. And so I call this the prosthetic process map. And if you start thinking about what we do in terms of process mapping, then it becomes very much like an engineer would think about things. And we sort of go through these phases. You do it the same way every time for every patient. And so when you get a really complex case, you don't know what to do, you just go through the process map. And so with the process map for Kathy, you'll see that in that first visit, we did our comprehensive exam, photo video series, and we took a TRIOS scan then. We then used that to create our smile design. Then we created our wax up. Now we did our mock up. And we're even going to use that for the provisional. And so this kind of shows you what the visits look like. And once actually Kathy saw the mock-up, she was actually very happy with it and she signed up for treatment. So about a couple of weeks later, we had her back, and now I'm going to show you the restorative part of the case. So all these cases before we start, so this is right before I've given local, we actually do the mock-up again, because I'm actually going to cut my depth cuts through the mock-up so that areas in my design that are purely additive, I can respect more of the tooth structure without having to unnecessarily reduce in that area if I'm going to add. And so we found that to be a very easy way to be conservative and also give the laboratory technicians the proper amount of clearance for what we're trying to have them make. And so basically this is not complex dentistry. I'm sure, all the people on the call tonight, are doing these kinds of cases. And so basically I cleaned up all the decay. I did the preparations and the buildups where I needed them. And then I'm going to use that matrix again to create provisionals. And so when I take this provisional out of the putty matrix, it's really kind of neat because now I'm holding something in 3D and it's exactly what was designed on the computer screen. And so something that we design with clicks is now something that we're holding in our hands. And I really think that that's a great way not to play telephone, and that this is really where the predictability comes into play. For the predictability of the fit of the restorations, the current generation of scanners, including the TRIOS, depend on the scanner being able to see your margins. And so soft tissue retraction is of paramount importance even today. I'm not going to tell you how to do it because you can use cords, you can use paste, you can use lasers, depends on who you speak to. I tend to gravitate towards using two cords and hemodent. It seems to be a very predictable way for me to work. And while the cord is sitting, then I'm going to start trimming and polishing the provisionals. Once the cord is set, I'm basically going to pull the cords and I'm going to stitch in all the preparations. And what I didn't mention yet is when I do cases like this, I'm going to scan that mock-up as a pre-preparation scan. So I'm going to scan all that information into the TRIOS. I'm going to capture the opposing arch and the two bites before I even start prepping the teeth. And then right before I'm going to do this, I basically just use the trim tool. I'm going to trim out number 5 to 12, and that's all I have to stitch back in. So when you see the preparations completed on the right, we gather the data in this segmental way, which is very kind of stress-free. We're not rushing to kind of get things at the very end and try to capture every single margin. We can kind of build the most ideal impression or scan over time. And it becomes a very stress-free kind of experience for both us and the patient. And so there's a point in the software that we need to actually mark the teeth. And those of you who have a Trios, have used a Trios, you may be wondering what that actually does. And beneath all of the beautiful color textures that we can see on these scans, they're really just a lattice work or a mesh work of these little triangular units called tessellation units. That's where the term STL comes from. And wherever we mark a tooth and we mark a preparation, you can see that the system preserves all the density of the triangles in that area. And it basically post-processes out some of the extraneous data, some of the other areas, like in this case, the areas that we didn't mark. And you can see that there's a clear difference in the density of triangles. And that's how we can manage the file sizes, and they become manageable files while still preserving the important data where we need it to preserve. And we go back to the patient and we try in the provisionals. There was a little cusp tip on number 12 that was a little shorter than I wanted to. So you can make any changes that you need to, just bond some composite here. And I wanted to show you what the initial occlusion looked like. This is very predictable. It comes right out of the digital design. And we finalized the patient that day and we sent her home, and we bring the patient back a week later. And it's that at that week later post-op is that I'm going to really evaluate the setup and see if I'm going to make any changes. You can see that we basically amended that cant, and we're making a pleasing curve of SPE for this patient. And it's at this point that we take a scan of the provisional, and you'll see we're going to be taking these scans at the same intervals for every case. We call them milestone scans. And it's that at that 1 week post-op visit is when I actually choose the shade. I don't force the patient into the shade on the first visit because they're there for many hours. It's stressful. We all come back and we look at it. And so basically this is when the case starts to get produced at the lab. On day one, we're sending the preparations, we're sending that whole scan, and the laboratory is going to hold it until they get the scan of the provisionals that you see here. And then they're going to align this scan to the other scans that I did. And that's how they're really going to copy the contours that we've worked hard to design and make in the patient. And so you can see here, we asked for layered Emacs in this case on the right-hand side, and the laboratory respected and reproduced the basic contours and size and shape of the provisionals. And so these are photos of us trying in the restorations. In fact, the only area that I adjusted was the contact point between number 8 and number 9. The patient was really happy with the look of the restorations, and we moved forward to bonding. And we bonded all the restorations, and we bring the patient back one more time a week later. And I'm going to show you what we do at that visit. Well, we're going to do a 1 week post-op occlusion check. And we don't only check the patient in maximum intercuspation, but we go through straight protrusive and want to make sure that we have even guidance on those lower incisors, and we go through the working movements. And most importantly, we go through these crossover movements. And the reason I'm putting this in here is that this is where a lot of the longevity of glass ceramic restorations is going to be achieved in creating these smooth guidance patterns. And so it's more than just using the scanner, but also using all of the knowledge that we have and we've built. The other things that I do at this 1 week visit is I'm also going to take portraits of the final portraits now that the tissues have healed. But most importantly, what I want is a post-op scan. And so this is the final milestone scan of the finished product. The patient is happy. We're happy. We've adjusted all the occlusion, and everything is just where we want it. And you can see here, these are all the different scans that we start to get. And we get a library of scans for every aesthetic case. You can follow these cases along, and that's really where a lot of the predictability comes into play. And when you look at the STL files of the virtual design to the provisionals to the final, it's all very predictable. It's all basically all the same. The final is only a little bit different than the other ones because instead of using monolithic methods, we used a cutback and layering method, which is what my technicians wanted to do. And so this really all becomes more about confidence and, having the confidence to be able to treat the kind of cases that you want to treat in the way that you want to treat them. And so this is another very similar case on a patient that really wanted natural looking aesthetics. And it's a combination of veneers and crowns. And just to repeat, it's the same process each time. When a patient like this comes in, we're going to do our data capture with the TRIOS and the photography. We move to the smile design, facially generated treatment planning, and this is the data alignment step. And we do this live with the patient the same way that we did before. We're going to engage the patient with the color and the texture. And what I wanted to show you different is that we actually do the digital wax ups ourselves now. So, first case I showed you, I treated 3 years ago. I outsourced the digital wax ups. Today, I actually do it myself because I find that I really like to understand the process start to finish. And instead of trying to communicate to the laboratory, it's actually not difficult at all to learn to do this yourself. And so we teach at Touro College of Dental Medicine, and my teaching partner, Dr. Alan Jerm, he came up with this term DTS. It's a digital tooth setup. So every case starts with a DTS. And now is when you get that CAD design software that we were talking about at the very beginning. And we happen to use the 3Shape product. I went back to a different patient, actually. This is a case that I treated maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when I was starting to do my own wax ups. I had finished the training at Spear, and we came back and said, I'm going to get involved with some of my own wax ups so I can control the outcomes and the contours and the occlusion. And so this was a case that we did in conjunction with our orthodontist. These are post orthodontic photos, and now we're ready to restore those three incisors. And so in those years, this is about 2016, I had my first TRIOS scanner, so I would outsource. I didn't have a printer yet. The laboratory would send me back these models, and I would mount them on a semi-adjustable articulator using a face bow, and then I would use the gray wax and I would run the articulator through and create the guidance and the crossovers and the straight protrusive. And basically, I'm not a very good lab technician, so I could only do one style wax up, and it looks like this. You're looking at it. And we used that to make provisionals. They didn't look great at that time, but the laboratory used it and we finished the case. But I went back and I actually found those scans and I put them into the digital CAD design software. And I wanted to see, how long would it take me to do a digital wax up? And so it's great to kind of go through the software because you can really manipulate this in a lot of different ways than just waxing on a stone model or a printed model. We can take instantaneous cross sections. We can look at the different thicknesses, how much we're adding. Is it additive or subtractive? We can really start to see this in a different way. And what's interesting is what took me an hour and a half plus to do the analog way took 12 minutes flat with the digital wax up software. And so that's really how I can fit in, doing these things and being involved with it, even with a busy practice that I'm not working late at night. And for cases like this, it's really, really simple. It's fun. You get a predictable kind of result. And it's really empowering to be able to do some of this yourself. And so I don't do every case, but I do every case that I want to do. And I outsource the others. And so basically having all of these tools is really the important thing. And what I wanted to show you is a little bit about how I managed to do this. Now, I mentioned that I have a rather small office. And I also have a growing family. I have two boys, they're 11 and 13. And I honestly don't want to be in the office past 5 o'clock. And so 12-minute wax ups I can do between patients sometimes. And I can do smile designs with patients during office hours. But when the closing bell goes at 5 o'clock, I want to be out the door with everybody else. I don't want to be in the office printing things and designing things and being late. So we actually, after the pandemic, I actually built a lab in my house actually. And so this may not be for everybody, but maybe it's for somebody out there. And so today, really, I have a design seat, and that's where I'm sitting right now to deliver this presentation to you. And what we consider the design seat is really a comfortable place to be able to look at files and manipulate scans. And so there's actually 3 monitors here you can see there. And so basically, I have all of the CAD design software on my computer at work, and which is always running. It's a gaming level desktop PC. So when I get home, I can just basically team viewer into that computer, and it's like I'm working in my office, except I'm home on time. And so I can manage all my wax ups this way, whether it's a surgical guide, whether it's if it's a simple case or complex case, we can handle everything here from the comfort of home. And then In an unfinished area of my basement, we basically have all of our printers. Today we have 3 printers. We have a Form 2, that was the original one that we had from 2017. Then we have a Form 3B, that's the newest one that we added middle 2021. And we also added the Sprint Ray printer, the Pro 95 in 2020. And so having these multiple printers, these are kind of value segment printers. We didn't spend $20,000 on these things. So you can have a couple of them. And why it's convenient is that you can have different materials in each of these printers. And so what I typically do is that older Form 2 is what I'm using for the digital wax up models. That does a really good job of printing beautiful, smooth surface models without a lot of stepping. I also use that for denture teeth. The new Form 3B we use for all prototypes. So whether it's shell temporaries, all the way up to the all-on-X 3D printed. I just designed a dual arch before we started today. And the Sprint Ray I'm using for splints as well as my surgical guides. And you can see those 2 black units on the left. Those are the isopropyl alcohol washing. It's basically all automated. And the one all the way to the left is the curing oven. All biocompatible resins need to be heat cured to achieve their biocompatibility and their full strength. And then it doesn't cost a lot of money to basically put together a little laboratory. You get a little air compressor. You can run a micro etcher from the air compressor. You have compressed air to blow the dust and liquid out. You have a lathe there. So I just kind of move these things from my office into this home lab. And then we actually have a little finishing station. It's not just a finishing station. I actually installed a dental technician lab bench, kind of like our dental school sim lab days. That little red unit you see there is another curing box, the one made by Sprint Ray. And we can create prototypes like what you see on the left here. So when I have an all-on-4 patient, I can get all the data, I can design it, I can print it, I can glaze it. It really doesn't take that much time. And like I said, I don't do every case. I do every case that I want to do, and I outsource the rest. And and so you can see when we do cases like this, it becomes very, very predictable. And so this is the same process that we did on the patient before with Kathy. We made our prototypes with the digital wax ups. And you can see here that we use the scanner to create impressions of veneers, crowns, and partial coverage crowns. It doesn't matter. As long as you prep clean and you retract clear, the scanner is going to be able to see what you have prepared in the mouth. And once the laboratory gets all this data, they just have to merge the prep scan to the provisional scan. You let your laboratory do what they're really good at, and you get really good results. And so the cases are starting to deliver much more predictably. I feel a lot more confident to be able to treat patients like this. And the final thing, we talked about the management part of it. And with TRIOS patient monitoring, they made that software so you could show patients their wear changing over time or recession, try to kind of prompt them to actually do treatment. But we actually use it. It's a powerful tool for these cosmetic and these aesthetic cases, because remember, I took all those milestone scans, right? I can align all of them together and we can actually see, a clear timeline of what has happened in this case. And so what you see here on the right is actually the provisional scan compared with the final restoration scan that we got after the 1 week post-op. And you can see any place where digital data kind of comes in and out of the colors, you get that speckling because both of the data sets are so similar that they kind of like blend in and out of each other. And so we know that the process was respected. There was no game of telephone. And this is why we have achieved a level of predictability using these tools that we never really even imagined possible, I would say 5 or 10 years ago. So the question comes back to, are you digital? And if so, how digital are you? And the answer to that question is it doesn't really matter. All that matters is that you use this technology to the extent that you want to. There's going to be some people on the call tonight that don't want to be involved with any of the design or any of the manufacturing. They wouldn't be caught dead with a dental laboratory in their basement. And that's great. So it's really important for those people to understand, really clearly all these steps that the laboratories are doing. And when you outsource the steps, you really need to understand what you're outsourcing. And that makes you a better partner with your laboratory. And it also leads to more predictability. But there's going to be some people tonight that are maybe piqued by this and want to get involved with it. And I hope that you saw, how you can kind of get some of these things. And so, with the limited time that we had tonight, I really just wanted to show an overview and hopefully, get some juices flowing for people out there who are looking to get into this. So you can see what's possible. We were only given about 45, 50 minutes today to really show a lot of different workflows. And so I hope we were able to kind of, spur some thought and spur some questions. Um, if you follow me on Instagram, I'm available for direct messaging. You'll see a lot of digital cases. You'll even see the Kathy's case there, but I post very frequently about all the different techniques there, and I'm happy to help anybody to get started. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention. And this brings us to the Q&A. So I'm going to give it back to Corinne, and I'm going to come on camera and we can do a question and answer.
Perfect. Thank you so much, doctor. So we have our first question is asking, how many hours are you taking for the prep and scan visit?
So it depends on the case. So if I'm doing a single unit case, I schedule about 90 minutes for the prep, temp, and scan. It doesn't take me that long. But the kind of cases that you saw tonight, I typically schedule about half a day. So that patient, Kathy, and the one afterwards, Addie, I usually do these cases on a Monday and I try not to have hygiene running on those days. So I don't have to get up and do exams. I'm not good at multitasking. And so I usually start about 9 o'clock, and both those cases are typically I'll be done by 12:30, 1 o'clock.
Okay, great. Our next question is from Wendy, and she asks, why use a TRIOS? Are there any advantages that really stood out to you when you were comparing it to some of their competitors?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been a TRIOS user since 2015. And I encourage anybody looking for a scanner to really do the exercise and look at all of them and kind of scan with them if you can in a live patient, more than just a model, because a lot of them feel one way on a model, but it's different scanning experience in the mouth. The advantages that I found that led me to starting with 3Shape and the TRIOS is that they really have the most intuitive scanning experience. The software is very kind of simple and elegant, and it's easy to understand. The stitching and the building of the images is just so fast and so efficient that it really made it easy to incorporate intraoral scanning, into the day when I can get a diagnostic scan, upper, lower, and 2 bite scans in less than 3 minutes. It can typically scan a full arch without really any missing data, about 45 seconds. And so that's one thing that stood out to me. The other thing that stood out to me for 3Shape, which is really different than a lot of the other competitors, is that 3Shape is essentially a laboratory company. They were a lab company first. They designed some of the very first digital box scanners that scan our stone models in the laboratory. And they came out with one of the first CAD design softwares called Dental System. And so I've found that there are some inherent advantages to using the 3Shape clinical dentist scanner. And then you can communicate with a 3Shape laboratory with the native file format between those. So it's not an STL, it's called a DCM. And so it's kind of like that, the model plus the color, plus the margin lines, plus mandibular movements, and all these other features that are bespoke to 3Shape. And so we've kind of stayed in one system, and then we're not coming in and out of a lot of different softwares, and it just seems to make sense. It keeps it simple.
Thank you for that explanation. Our next question is from Chase, who asks, where would you start to learn how to do digital wax ups yourself?
So I would say there are a lot, depending on which software you get. The first thing I would do is whatever software you get, go and join the Facebook groups that are associated with that software. And then from there, you're going to see the experts, the power users, a lot of them run courses. Our group was actually running courses about the 3Shape software before the pandemic. And so there's going to be these private groups that will be able to kind of do like level 1, 2, and 3 kind of live courses, but there's also a lot of content online as well. And so as you get started, with lab software, it's the same thing. It's crawl, walk, run, fly. The first thing that I started was just the digital wax up. The software can do so many things, but just start with those simple kind of workflows and work up from there.
Okay, thank you. And last question for the night, in essence of time, comes from Brenda, who asks, what happens if the bite will not allow you to restore to the patient's desired aesthetics?
So if the occlusion is not going to work, and I think I'm understanding this question right, those are all things that you're going to pick up before you start the case. And if there's something about the patient's occlusion that's precluding you from putting the teeth where they need to be, well, then you need to speak to the patient about how to address those before you get into treatment, whether that's equilibration, maybe it's orthodontics. Usually, both the cases, actually, the second case that I just showed you was a cosmetic case in conjunction with orthodontics. We do orthodontics on more of these cases than not these days. But the real answer is, if the patient's not willing to do that, then we don't do the treatment. And it's much better to discover it in this planning phase where you have all the data to explain to the patient. I found that most patients actually go through with the necessary things if they want the treatment, because they see a lot of the whys in the workups that we're doing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Doctor, for the great presentation this evening. If anyone does have any outstanding questions, you can email us at webinars@henryschein.com. And as a thank you for attending, everyone will receive the recording via email in the next week. So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars.
Thank you.